can see the participant number creeping up, so we'll wait a bit. I know we have over 350 of you registered this morning, which honestly, I was a little shocked by. Normally during this time period, we tend to see a little bit lower registration numbers at our town halls, but we are delighted to have you all joining us on this cloudy, I guess, late February morning, which is crazy to say because it feels like we were just together in Annapolis for our CPA day, but that was over a month ago. We are grateful to have you joining us this morning. I see that number continuing to creep up, so I'll wait a bit, but I do have Conferences.io open. If you scroll down slightly from where you're watching the stream on our MACPA website, you'll see a link to that Conferences.io polling. This is volunteer polling, but love to get some insights from you, who you are, how you're joining us, your area of the profession. We'll also do social Q&A through that site. I know sometimes it's a little confusing because it is on a separate window, but if you click on that link, it should open in a separate window. You can move it to a different tab, or actually I'll go to this slide so you can see that. You can also just use your phone, and so answer the polling questions on your phone. You can hold your phone up to that QR code. As usual, we're going to start with that positive focus. And so I see it is 8:32, and I'll go ahead and start. I see the numbers creeping out, but we'll get started. So good morning. Welcome to our February Town Hall. I am Rebecca Olson. I have the pleasure of being the CEO of the Maryland Association of CPAs, and we are delighted to have you joining us for this February Town Hall. A little bit of a mid-session kind of legislative update to hear about what's going on, some of the trends we're seeing throughout the country. We are grateful to have a good friend, Joe Crosby, here from Multi-State, sharing some things, but we'll start with our polling. First, we love to see what is your positive focus for the day. This is even better when we have an early morning town hall, because if we can start our day, if we can start a meeting, a learning session, a tough conversation, whatever it is, with that positive mindset, we really are better able to think critically, to learn, to have more energy. So somebody's celebrating a 65th birthday. Congratulations. That is awesome. Somebody is just out of the hospital, so coming out of a lower point, but that is certainly a win. We're glad that you are home. Somebody's daughter has made the college decision for Towson University. We'll hope that she's going to be an accounting major too. Somebody is retired. Congratulations. Somebody found some new staff members, which is not an easy thing to do in this environment. What time with a 1-year-old grandson, retirement nap is my goal. Okay, that sounds great. A good nap is always a great thing. Went skiing, new home, tax season's off to a good start. Just this makes my heart happy too. So thank you for having me smile this morning as well. Let's get some demographics about where you all work. I know this is really tiny print. I always say that, and then I try and make it bigger so that we can see it, but then, okay, there we go, maybe. You'll have to let me know. Because it's very small on my screen as well. Let's see, I'll click into it and see. Looks like we have, there we go. Good amount of sole practitioners, private company folks, government, not-for-profit, some public company, our retired friends that we're all jealous of, joining us, and thanks again for being part of this profession and continuing to be part of this profession. I think there's something unique about this community that makes you want to stay, which is pretty cool. And then we have a variety of different sized firms with us as well. I'll go to the next slide. and that will open the next poll, and then I'll open them all up. But this is what level you are, your position or level. So we have pretty high level folks as usual as well. Middle manager, senior management, C-suite there. Keep us going. What are the challenges? I know we started with good news and our positive focus, but we want to be realistic. There are some challenges that we're all facing, of course. And so it looks like numbers are starting to move around on us. Still seems to be that talent is the number one challenge. We're seeing that throughout the profession, whether it's on the firm side, corporate side. Probably only our sole practitioners and retired folks are the only ones maybe not facing this particular challenge, but we know there's a lot of challenges around that currently. And then of course you might be saying, well, I have another. So we do have, if you have another, tell us what it is so that we can update these trends and these challenges and make sure that we are providing resources, providing learning opportunities that really address your top challenges, because that's what we seek to do as your professional association, is to bring us together in community to learn, to be protected in Annapolis and beyond, to promote the profession and to really help each other. With that, I wanted to take a time to shout out and say thank you to this beautiful group of people that joined me in Annapolis on a very cold January morning. We were blessed to have, I think, what was maybe the only day that week where there wasn't delays of some kind because of weather. I think the kids had off, at least in some counties, either a half day or a early closure or something every day that week, except for that little day on Thursday, January 18th. So thank you for making the trek out there. You can still see the kind of snow from the first storm. And I think this was pre the second storm that came the next day. But we're delighted to have you with us. CPA Day is such an important part of our advocacy strategy and program, but that's not the only part. And so I'd like to invite Maria Caputo, who is a principal at CLA and a member of our CPA Committee on Political Action, to talk a little bit about another really, really critical part of our advocacy efforts, our PAC. So Maria?
Thank you so much, Rebecca, and thank you everyone for being on this town hall this morning. Such a great way to come together as CPAs in Maryland. And another way that we come together, as Rebecca was talking about, is how we interact with our legislators. And as we all know, when it's important to have your voice heard, it's important to set the groundwork ahead of that through building relationships. And one of the ways that we do that through the MACPA PAC is through interacting with those legislators, providing donations to them, attending the events that they hold. And while that doesn't take a tremendous amount of funding, it does take funding, and that funding comes from each of us. So if you're so inclined to be a part of ensuring our voice is heard when we need it to be heard, please donate today to the PAC. I think the QR code is up on the screen. No amount is too small, so $20 is greatly appreciated, but of course, larger donations are welcomed as well. So thank you so much for taking a moment to listen, and thank you, Rebecca and everyone.
Thank you so much, Maria, for joining us. I asked Mary Beth, our legislative director, to pull this information for me. We had it in a prettier slide last year. We didn't have the design team to have enough time to do this. But this is what we're facing in terms of our PAC. So you can see our numbers and our PAC contributions versus the bankers, versus the plumbers, especially versus the trial lawyers in Annapolis. And so just want to, again, really urge you, if you are able to give $10, $15, $20, or if you're able to stand in the gap for a student, a future CPA, a CPA candidate, someone that for whatever reason isn't able to give and do a larger donation, we would really, really appreciate that. relationships with legislators is critical to our efforts in Annapolis. And when it's like any relationship, right? You got to build some trust, some familiarity with folks before you ask them to do things, either to sponsor a bill that we need to have passed, or to vote no on a bill, or to even reach out for insights and information as they write bills and tax laws and things like that. That all takes establishing relationships, and that takes money. That's how it works in a lot of ways. So please, I'm going to leave this up here for a second, and then I'm going to give it to you at the end of the presentation as well. There's also a link, if you scroll down from where you're watching the video, to go donate. Really, really appreciate anything that you can give to help us in these efforts. Next, before we invite our today's speaker, there's 3 issues that I want to mention and give you a little bit of an update on. All of these issues have seen a lot of conversation on our MACPA Connect tax community. If you are a tax professional and you're not utilizing this community, you're missing out on probably one of the biggest benefits for our tax professionals that MACPA offers. So please start you can be a observer, you can be a contributor, but it's a fantastic place to ask questions, share solutions, and really collaborate with your fellow members. All of the issues that I'm talking about came up because we monitor this and really look to have ways that we can help you. It's also the place that when we have some sort of news, whether that's from the comptroller or something else, we post first. And so if you're not looking at that, you might miss things. There's ways to control your settings so you don't get inundated with emails every post. You can get a daily summary, you can get a weekly summary. Our Member Service Center can help you with that. So the first issue I wanted to talk about is Maryland's Form 1. Maryland's Form 1 was updated this year, and this came to us from our tax community, and it now only contains one signature by either the corporate officer or the preparer, and there's some new language in that section in that yellow box before you sign that. We requested of the AICPA Professional Ethics Division to examine this form and specifically the wording in that section 4, and they concur with some of the concerns we saw from our members on the community, specifically the use of the term declares and attests by the form signer could pose some issues for CPAs. So in the realm of public accounting, of course, the term attest implies that the signer is providing a certain level of assurance and opinion on that specific matter. So to both prepare and sign this form for a client, the CPA must have adhered to professional standards that govern attestation services. So failure to comply with those would constitute a violation of the Code of Professional Conduct. Given that, and possible liability issues, CPAs will likely prepare the form and then have a client or agent review and sign the form. So we're recommending that CPAs check with their professional liability carrier, of course, for that form, their interpretation of that Form 1 language. We have notified and been in contact with SDAT as well of this issue, and they are reviewing. So I just wanted to give you a quick update there. As we get more information, we will post it in that community. The second issue is beneficial ownership information reporting. So BOI reporting, you might remember me talking about it back in our town hall in June, actually, but it's an anti-money laundering initiative. It was enacted through the Corporate Transparency Act in 2021, and it's mandating that BOI, beneficial ownership information, be reported to FinCEN, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, starting in 2024, which we are in. There has been some concerns about whether CPAs assisting clients in this report could be characterized as unauthorized practice of law. UPL is determined actually state by state, so it's a little confusing. So on behalf of our members, we went to the State Board of Public Accountancy to request that they request a formal opinion from the Maryland Attorney General to the extent to which non-attorney CPAs can assist clients in preparing this. So that request has been made. It's now being considered by the Attorney General. Actually, that process went through a lot faster than we even anticipated. And so we will be notifying you as soon as an opinion is issued. I'm going to open a poll now that is asking just curiosity, kind of taking a temperature check here. If you are, or your firm is, if this applies to you, of course, providing these services are related to BOI reporting compliance under the CTA. So just to get an idea of how many of our members are providing this service. If you are retired, in corporate, not doing this at all in your firm, feel free to say NA, but we would love to understand a little bit more about what our members need. I also linked 2 different resources if you scroll down to the event materials. The first link is from our partners at Aon and CNA. It's a link to their article, their risk alert, and then a sample engagement letter. So if you are going to perform these services, Aon and CNA have said that this service would be covered. Of course, there's lots of caveats with that. I don't have the exact quoted language, so I'm not going to say that. But know that this there's a lot of risk in this, and so you need to kind of know your client and know your situation and understand that before you decide to take on a service like this. The other link is the link to AICPA's landing page. It's fantastic, has FAQs, has that same sample engagement letter, risk alert, things like that. I know that is, I believe, behind a member wall. So I wanted to give you both the Aon and our partners at AICPAs. I'll leave that poll open, but I'll keep going here. The last issue that I wanted to bring up was Maryland Tax Connect. So Maryland Tax Connect was launched on February 6th. This is the comptroller's new online taxpayer portal. It, I believe, is only open for business right now. I think their plans in the next 18 months is to have individuals on it as well. With any technology transition, if you've been there, you know this. I've been through it here at MACPA. Any new platform it's never completely seamless, of course. It's never without challenge. And as members maneuver around this new site, they've been sharing suggestions, feedback, questions, helpful workarounds and things through that MACPA tax community. So please continue to do that. We are monitoring that, and we will continue to share as we gather some of that feedback with the comptroller's office. And so please know that we know, we hear you, and we are sharing that information with the comptroller's office. There's a lot of other bills going on that MACPA is watching with the help of our legislative executive and our amazing state tax committee. I feel like if you see a state tax committee member, give them a hug. It is appropriate here because they are in some of their busiest months, and yet they are taking time to represent our profession, to weigh in on a lot of these bills that are happening in Annapolis. So stay tuned to the MACPA blog for updates and that MACPA Connect community where we will post updates as we have them. So with that, I am delighted to welcome and thank for being here during what I would imagine is his busy season as well, Joe Crosby. Joe is the CEO of Multistate, a government relations services firm. He has extensive experience in the government relations, in tax policy. And so he's going to give us a little bit of an update of what he is seeing, both, in Maryland, but then kind of broadly what the state government landscape policies are looking like. So Joe, I will take it to you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Appreciate the opportunity that you and your staff have given me to be with your group this morning. Thrilled to speak with everybody. I did really appreciate the positive thoughts start. There were a lot of wonderful ones there. I want to especially call out, because certain things catch your eye, the individual who's just ordered a new boat. Congratulations. As I come to you sitting on my boat in Marathon, Florida. I'm a boater myself, and we'll be back up in Annapolis this summer, but for right now, in relatively cool 65-degree weather for the Florida Keys, but not going to complain. We'll talk a little bit today about state budget and tax trends, and then move into some of the policy issues that I know are important to your members and trending nationwide. Just a little bit more about my firm for those who don't know us. As Rebecca said, we're a state and local government relations firm. What that means is we help our corporate and trade association clients engage with state and local governments across the country to educate on the issues that matter to them, to defend against deleterious legislation, to support legislation that would be, advantageous to them. We hire lobbyists on behalf of our clients in all 50 states. We provide lobbying compliance services, which is much like tax compliance for lobbyists, reporting and registering. And then finally, and where really the information for today's presentation comes, is we track legislative activity in all 50 states, DC, Canada and all of its provinces, 5,000 local jurisdictions, and I've got a team of about 30 people who do that full time. So I am not expert on all the things that I will be talking about this morning. I will do my best to answer your questions. If you ask me a business tax policy question, though, I should be okay. That's really where my expertise lays and the work that I've been doing for 25 years. So let's jump right into it and talk a little bit about the state revenue picture. So I'll begin where I'm most comfortable with taxes and revenue. So as you're seeing there in Maryland and across the country, we have slowing revenue growth. There are a few states where we're seeing some revenue declines, and I'll talk a little bit about those. But the reality is most states from a revenue perspective are still doing well. They're just not doing as well as they were during 2021, 2022, 2023, when we saw revenues jump markedly because of the federal government's response to the pandemic. So we can go ahead to the next slide, Rebecca, and have a chart here, which this shows tax revenues by state compared to expectations of collections. So did tax collections come in at projection, below projection, or above projection? And what we really see is 2020 was an anomaly. As we all know, we can remember back to 2019, the economy had been expanding for, at that point, several years, one of the longest expansions we'd had in the modern era, and things were going pretty well. And we really only had 2 states at that point where tax collections were below target, and then 2 states on target and 46 states that were above target. Move ahead to 2020, and this is not a surprise to anyone. I'm looking at my numbers over here. We had 35 states come in below expectations because, of course, the projections for fiscal year 2020 were made prior to the pandemic. And then a few states came in high. I'd have to go back and look at the data and see why 9 states came in higher in 2020 than they imagined. My guess is a couple things, like there's a state like New York, for example, their fiscal year ends March 31st. So their fiscal year 2020 ended right at the onset of the pandemic. My guess is that reversed pretty quickly. And 6 states on target. Then go ahead to 2021, 2022, and 2023. We had 47, 49, and 46 states actually reporting revenues above their forecast. A couple reasons for this. I mentioned one, obviously, is the federal government response to the pandemic. The other is the uncertainty led revenue forecasters to be conservative. They always tend to be a little bit conservative because rarely are you punished for figures coming in above expectations. But if there's a significant miss to the downside, that's a challenge. Legislatures have to cut, or governors have to cut ongoing spending and future budgets. So there tends to be a conservative bias anyway. But I think also because it was really difficult to expect that the initial support that the federal government provided in 2020 would continue into 2021, 2022, and even 2023, right? We did not have the same direct transfers to individuals. We did not have the same direct response in terms of businesses like the PPP loans, but we did have ongoing federal fiscal stimulus. And we still see that today with the federal government running a primary deficit of about 1.6 trillion right now, which is, not normal if you go back to pre-pandemic levels. I mean, that's an enormous deficit, primary fiscal deficit for the federal government to be running at a time of essentially full employment and economic expansion. And so that stimulus continues to support the economy. That said, that sugar high comes off. And so we see states this year with a number reporting lower revenues than projected. 6 states so far for fiscal 2024. We're, more than halfway through fiscal 2024 right now. For most states, it ends on, for 46 of the 50 states, it will end on June 30th. Only 16 states above and 14 states on target. Doesn't add up to 50 because not all states timely report their progress year to date against projections. So that was the most recent information that we had from the National Association of State Budget Officers. But I think the proportions are probably going to be fairly similar. What I do think going forward is that we will see more states coming in on target or below and fewer above target. A few reasons for this. One of them is natural resource prices. So some of the states that were actually lower in some of those pandemic years were states like Alaska and Wyoming that are heavily dependent on natural resources for revenues. So we see continued moderation in natural resource prices. The stock market has risen significantly this year, as we know, but that's not going to affect collections through April 15th or even later in this year. So as you look at collections for the current state fiscal year, you're not going to see the same significant bump from capital gains, for example, or business profits taxes reported with tax returns or with estimated payments made in April in most states. And then although the economy continues to hold up in terms of employment, and we're seeing significant growth, wage withholding itself is not rising like it was during the pandemic. Again, partly because although the economy is still doing well, it's not booming like it was, and partly because there was the massive federal unemployment support. So we had individuals during the pandemic receiving unemployment payments that actually exceeded their earnings prior to unemployment. And so that drove wage withholding growth for states, especially until some of them went ahead and eliminated withholding taxes on unemployment benefits, but that wasn't the norm going into the pandemic. So top line, states are still doing fine, but revenue growth is slowing and in some cases declining, and we'll get to that in a couple slides. So Rebecca, if you'll move ahead to the next slide. This slide really talks about the budgets that states are preparing right now. And this shows some of the individual states that are experiencing challenges. California's outlook continued to worsen. The governor, and this I think is writ large, what we're seeing in differences between the response of what I'll call conservative states, so states controlled fully by Republicans. And if we have time at the end, we'll talk a little bit about politics and elections and where things stand. And then states controlled fully by Democrats. And so California obviously is a state now that has been relatively since Governor Schwarzenegger ended his term, controlled fully by Democrats. If you go back to 2021, Governor Newsom was touting $100 billion surplus. That's a lot even in a state like California. And as part of his fiscal message, he touted that California was spending a lot of the surplus on one-time expenditures so that it would insulate itself in a downturn. Well, that turns out to be true-ish, right? I mean, some of these things were in fact one-time funds, but they were not necessarily spent on one-time problems. For example, homelessness. There was a significant spend of one-time funds on homelessness, but as we know, homelessness is not a one-time problem. And so we saw the situation turn. California is heavily dependent on capital gains taxes because of its progressive income tax system, with the top rate, when you add everything up, coming in at about 14%, a little above 14%. And so with the capital markets and even there heavily skewed towards technology, 2022 was not a great year for the stock markets, and 2023 until the very end was not great as well. I mean, 2022 was good, but when it comes to California, we saw some diminution. Things picked up in December. And then this year so far has been very strong. So you can see a bump in California potentially coming in the future, especially with the concentration in equities markets around the tech firms. All that said, California's revenues have not really been falling. They just haven't been growing. And when you look at their baseline budget, to balance the budget, California would require organic revenue growth of about 13% per year. That's clearly not sustainable. No state has ever sustained 13% year over year revenue growth on its existing tax structure. You can only do that through tax increases. And so it was guaranteed that California was going to have a shortfall, even if revenues continue to grow. In fact, revenues are stagnating. They're basically flat. So not a really decline. I think they were down by like 0.1, 0.2% the last time I looked overall. So, you know, basically flat, but still the surplus, excuse me, the deficit continues to increase because of that expectation of revenue growth. So the governor, I believe, came out with, in his budget revise, as they call it, with an expectation of a 30-something billion dollar deficit. The latest numbers that came out yesterday from the legislative analyst's office show the deficit of $78 billion. So you go from a $100 billion surplus in 2021 to a $78 billion deficit in 2024. Not every state is that volatile. California, I think, leads the volatility game because of the structure of its tax system, its highly progressive nature. And I'm not opining on whether that's good or bad, but it does enhance volatility. And then the outsized reliance on capital gains to generate that tax revenue on the higher income side. So California is not the only state, of course, that has some challenging forecasts. We have New York in here. New York's picture is similar to California, different in detail, not as large, but similar. Massachusetts also similar. So, you know, your New Jersey, you're looking at some of these, what I'll call higher spend states, meaning when you look at per capita spending, they're higher, and more progressive tax systems. So they are reliant on continued growth at the higher income levels. And then Maryland. Maryland's revenue problem is not as significant as, say, California or New York, but you have this structural deficit, which has persisted now for, I mean, at least a decade. I'd have to go back to Governor O'Malley, and geez, I hate to date myself, but it may have been 2006, 2008. I can't remember now. Going back before that to Governor Ehrlich, I remember in the recession of the early 2000s, Republican governor, but I spent some time trotting the halls of the State House in Annapolis, arguing against some of the corporate tax changes that he proposed. Governor O'Malley supported a sales tax increase to fund a number of things, including transportation. But as you all know, the Kirwan Commission has built in significant increases in education expenditure over a relatively long period of time. And so Maryland's issue is somewhat like California's, except I would say it was more deliberative in that there was an expectation of future spending on a recurring matter rather than what I'll call fiscal alchemy, where you're going to spend one-time money on extenuating extensive long-term problems. So in Maryland, there was, I think, more honesty about like, this is a long-term structural issue, but there's still been difficulty grappling on the tax front of it. Where are you going to generate the revenue to pay for this? So congratulations. You're in a state that has a challenge. Now, some of the other states that we look as conditional short-term fiscal outlook, like Alaska, that's really about oil prices. They've got enough money socked away, and there's, we don't need to worry too much about them. Illinois is a state that, if we were redoing this map now, I'd probably put in the purple category. Illinois has a long-term challenge. It's different than California's and New York. They actually have a flat income tax structure with a 5% rate, so it's not onerous. But they have, ongoing population loss, which is a challenge. Rebecca, yep.
Yeah,
go ahead.
I would say we do have a question that came in, and
Great.
it's an interesting one. And I think we can even expand it a little bit. So the person is specifically asking about the migration of people moving out of California and the impact of that. I would gather we could say the same thing about Maryland. I know our comptroller's report said, yes, we have people moving from New England coming down, but then we're also kind of losing people to Florida and things like that at the same level. So what impact do you see just the migration, people moving, having, if at all?
It's a great question, and I'm smiling because I can give you the answer if you tell me what your partisan registration is, because the studies on this are all over the map. There's my friends over at ALEC. the American Legislative Exchange Council, sorry for using shorthand, it's a group of conservative legislators. They do a report every year on ranking the states on their tax systems, and they really heavily weight low to no income taxes, fewer taxes overall. And they've got great data that shows that those states are doing better and have been doing better for quite a long time on fiscal measures. When you look at a lot of the academic economists, I am not one, but I pretend to be one from time to time. Their studies will say that that there is very little relationship between population movement and tax structures, particularly income taxes. That it is explained by the weather, it's explained by jobs, it's explained by familial ties, it's explained by education needs, a lot of other things, and not taxes. This audience is CPAs, and so I think that you probably have clients who have moved for tax purposes. And so what I would say is the academicians are probably right in that taxes are a relatively small factor when it comes to demographic changes, population moves overall. And I would say that your experience is also right, that for certain higher income individuals, especially in the wake of the growing ability to work remote or hybrid, as I noted, I'm on my boat in Florida right now. There are certain individuals who will be motivated to move because of taxes, that group of individuals is growing, and that at the very, very highest levels, those changes can have an impact on states. There was, we saw some specific examples out of California. They're public, so I can, like Elon Musk, for example, out of Illinois, and I can't remember the gentleman's name at the moment. He was governor. he left and he moved his entire investment banking company to Florida. There, one individual in New Jersey. This was a number of years ago, but the state, in looking at its higher income tax rate, did indicate that if this individual moved, it would be a whole percentage decline in like multiple percentage point decline in New Jersey's overall revenue, because his contribution to the total personal income tax take was something like 7 or 8% of all personal income taxes paid in New Jersey. This individual was like 7 or 8% of them. So tax policy matters. There was just Megan McArdle of the Washington Post yesterday, the op-ed wrote about this. So I can say that it has an effect. I can't say the magnitude of the effect, and I can't say the direction of the effect, because we have economists with two hands.
Absolutely. Great response. Thank you.
So last slide on sort of revenues and really economic conditions is this one. And this is to say, this one right here, this slide on rainy day funds, what it really says is that despite the relative slowdown in revenue growth, and in some cases decline, no state should have to increase taxes this year if they don't want to. Because during the pandemic, states were generating so much revenue, they literally didn't know where to put it. And what I mean by literally is that most states have limits in law on how much they can put in rainy day funds. And every single state virtually, there may be one or two exceptions, but I can't think of one, put as much as they were legally allowed to put away, and then shoved money in various executive branch agencies, transportation funds, whatever it might be, to avoid having to spend money because they didn't have anywhere else to spend it on. And so what that means, I mean, this is an historic high when you look at rainy day funds in states like California, 18%, Nevada, 26%, Texas, 33%, Oklahoma, 55%. What that means is that they could, 55% for Oklahoma, they could fund more than a half a year budget on what's available in their rainy day fund. You look at states like Alaska, so this is statutorily determined rainy day funds. There's other places that money is shoved. For example, Alaska has the permanent fund. In 2022, the permanent fund's investment gains were triple Alaska's total budget. So, Alaska has challenges, but the challenges is a political fight over how much of the permanent fund should be used to support the general revenue versus go to the people. So every state should be able to balance the budgets they're working on right now with their rainy day funds if they so choose, and not enact tax increases. Some states will still choose to enact tax increases. In Maryland, maybe one of those states, we'll see. All right, Rebecca, we can move on, and I'll come back at the end to the extent we have time, to any questions that people have on tax and budgets. But we'll go on to policy outlooks now. And if you cast forward to the next slide, this is a slide that I mentioned our team of analysts going into this year. They put together a list of the issues that we thought legislatures would be focusing on in 2024. And these are the issues they're going to focus on. It's not a lot of focus here, a ton of issues. We're not going to talk about all of them, but you can see, state legislatures, state legislators have a very full agenda when it comes to issues that they think are worth legislating on. And if we'll go on to the next slide, we'll talk just about 3 of them really this year. Some technology issues, ESG, and some tax policy issues. The hottest issue by far, an issue that was not an issue 3 years ago. I mean, literally not an issue. If you go back and look 3 years ago, there were basically no bills on AI. AI in real life doesn't have a strong definition, and political life doesn't have a strong definition. Montana, for example, last year passed a law regulating social media content. Some people call that AI. I mean, we would not characterize it as AI. So it just depends on how broadly you define this sort of thing. Regardless of whether you define it broadly or narrowly, the amount of activity has jumped dramatically. Many of these are focused on studies, which is rational, right? I mean, most legislators don't know what AI is, let alone what to do about it. And that's not to impugn legislators. Most of us don't know what AI is. Like when we talk about it, we're talking about large language models. There's lots of flavors of AI. Some of them are not new. Algorithms, as we all know, are not new. Making decisions based on algorithms are not new. So we've been using AI from that context, and for a long time, it's getting better and it's getting more useful. But we think of things like using AI in, for example, resume selection. That's been something that lawmakers have focused on for a long time, where, for example, individuals with a prior criminal history might be tossed out. Same thing with financial institutions and insurance, right? Where there have been algorithms for a long time that have been of interest to legislators. So that's an evolution rather than something new. And so legislators are studying what a couple of things that are new is concern about the use of AI to develop deep fakes for pornography, really. We're seeing that. I mean, it's again, front page of the Washington Post today, and election interference, right? So we're seeing that. If you look at some of the comments from Ukrainian leaders over the past couple of weeks, they've focused on Russian disinformation and using AI and deep fakes to make videos and other sorts of things that make it look as if people are, saying things that they're not really saying. We're going to continue to see this. I think this election season will force a reckoning on that. State legislators are acting here partly because of a feeling that the federal government is not acting. And we see that across the board, where state legislators are engaging on things that arguably should have some federal response, but state legislators are not seeing that. And they're hearing from their children. And we'll get that because I think maybe my next slide is about data privacy. So these things kind of link together. And then comprehensive AI bills, looking more at the development of AI models. And I'm going to just look over here to my notes. Disclosures, notifying consumers, mandating watermarks for AI generated content. There's been a lot of news recently about AI in search and search results, whether it's Google or anything else. Opting out reporting to allow these study commissions to understand better whether there is implicit bias in some of these, and then developing some sort of model to determine whether these AI models themselves are safe, right? Is it going to result in some sort of catastrophe? I'm not an expert on here, so I'm gonna not opine on that. But it's certainly something that it concerns a lot of people. So I think what we're going to see quite a bit this year is a lot of activity on AI. We will see some enactments for sure, but we're not going to see a ton of states enact new regulations. We'll see some. Connecticut is right now, Senate President Looney there is considered sort of a leader in some of the legislation on AI. And so they're debating that right now, and we'll see what's coming out. And then Maryland is leading on AI, leading on taxing AI. It's the only state right now that is specifically looking at taxing AI. So congratulations on first out of the box on how to tax a new technology. And I know it's more complicated than that, but I have to joke about it a little bit because I'm not surprised, really. given the digital advertising tax. Maryland first in the nation there. My former home state of Maine, Dirigo is the model. We lead, but Maryland's leading on some of these cutting edge or bleeding edge tax issues. So we can move on, Rebecca, to the digital privacy, which again is somewhat related to comprehensive privacy. This is not a new issue. And really, if you go back to Europe with the GDPR regulations, we essentially as a country just said, you know what, that's good, we'll defer to you. I mean, we have not at a federal level developed comprehensive privacy legislation. There was discussion about it. GDPR came out for global companies, and US companies tend to be more global than most. 65% or something of our stock market cap is companies with more than 1,500 employees, which is way outsized compared to other countries. So they're already complying with GDPR, right? So to a certain extent, we have a de facto European comprehensive privacy regime. Yet, just like AI, state governments, state legislators are not necessarily content with that. And so we saw California via initiative pass a comprehensive privacy bill. Gosh, I'm going to say back in 2018 now. I can't recall that long ago anymore, but it was a while ago. And then we really saw not that much happen. And it was over a couple of things. We had a division within the tech space over the right model. And I'm not going to name company names here because this isn't necessarily public and I don't like to do that. But we had one tech company who was interested in one model and a set of tech companies interested in another. And then we had banks and other financial institutions that had their own issues. And then the general business. So we had really different groups and not a lot of convergence there. And then there was another group, which you already highlighted in your slides, Rebecca, and that was the trial bar. And so one of the sticking points was almost all of these privacy bills also included a private right of action. So they were be enforceable through class action, torts. That was a sticking point for the whole business community. And then really we saw the logjam break in 2022 and 2023. And so it was California and then nothing and all these bills. And then all of a sudden a whole bunch of states enacted them in 2022, 2023. And what this slide shows is bills that carried over from last year plus bills introduced this year. It's never going to be the case that the whole country's purple or whatever that color is, mauve. In that there's always a couple of holdouts, no matter what, right? I mean, but I would not be surprised if I did this presentation next year or 2 years hence, that we're going to see most of the states having enacted comprehensive privacy bills. They're not all going to be the same, but there will be more similarity because we do get into copycat legislation. We'll see the same thing in AI. States are going to experiment. Nobody knows what's going to be the right answer, but once a state hits on it, like a California, we'll see that roll out. I'll pause here for any questions on AI or data privacy before we move on to ESG, which I'm only going to very briefly touch on.
I am not seeing any questions at this moment, so I think we can keep moving.
Okay, so ESG, environmental, social, and governance, it's been a big issue for about a decade now. It's been mainly a corporate issue rather than a government issue. Except for the environmental side of it. We have seen really an explosion in state legislation on this. And it is, kind of like the question that came up earlier on, do taxes matter for demography, politics, partisan affiliation? It's the same thing here. We've seen, there was like the initial effort was on incorporating, well, we've seen a lot in the financial area, incorporating ESG parameters. It really is a financial industry concept into evaluating investments. And then it migrated to the government space. We saw California being a leader here, for example, requiring a certain number of female and minority representation on corporate boards. That was struck down as unconstitutional a couple of years ago. And we see more and more of these in what I'll call blue states. And we've seen a backlash over the past 2 or 3 years on red states. And it really was initiated with Texas. And I know many of these legislators, so I can speak from personal experience. They were hearing from constituents saying, we can't get a loan because we're in the firearms industry, because we're in the oil industry. And these large banks, I'm not saying this is true, I'm just saying what legislators say that they're hearing, are denying us loans because they've signed on to the Paris Accords, where they're going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. They're going to do these sorts of things, whatever it is. And so then there was this backlash that was really initiated in Texas and spread to other conservative states, where they said, we're not going to do business as a state with companies or institutions that adopt these ESG metrics that injure our constituents. So in Texas's case, they said, we're not going to issue bonds through financial institutions that sign on to the Paris Accords. And so, this fight's not stopping. It's going to continue on. Why is it important to CPAs? Because I'd say two reasons. A lot of the laws that are being enacted just deal with interaction with government generally, right? And so, whether as a vendor, for example, if you're doing work with the state or a municipality in some of these, or assisting in any ways with investment decisions. So it's sort of just out there. It's like, do we need to be cognizant of some of these bills because of the interactions that we have with state government, which all CPAs do at some level or another, or because of the measurement, right? So more and more, especially on the environmental side with regard to greenhouse gas emissions and states requiring that companies report their tier 3 emissions, somebody's going to have to measure those emissions. Who measures things? CPAs measure things. So there could be a market opportunity here. If you look at the California law, it has some interesting language in there that doesn't sound like CPA language. It sounds like, they're not terms of art that we would use. And so there is a risk if CPAs aren't involved in this and states move down this road, that there'll be a new industry spring up to measure these greenhouse gas emissions that is, outside of the CPA space or doesn't require the expertise that CPAs have. So we can go on from there. I've got really just one policy issue to talk about, which is tax policy. So coming back to where I began, and we'll go ahead one more. I'm just going to highlight tax on services. Why does this matter? It matters because when we're talking about taxes on services, we're mainly talking about taxes on professional services. Rebecca, I can do a whole hour presentation on this alone. So I'm not going to really say anything other than economists generally agree the sales tax is a consumption tax. They agree that a consumption tax should reach all consumer consumption. That's sort of tautological, and should exempt business inputs. The reality is there's not a single state sales tax which comports with the economic principles whatsoever. According to my former employer and friends of the Council on State Taxation, about 42% of all sales tax revenue is imposed on business inputs. So things that businesses buy as part of their production, whether their production is goods or services. So sales taxes generally do not comport with the economic reality. But what we see in blue states when there's a desire for additional revenue is an argument that higher income people who disproportionately purchase services are not paying an equivalent amount of tax because the services are not subject to tax. What we see often in red states is that the income tax is a bad tax, and we should reduce or eliminate the income tax by expanding the sales tax basis services to backfill those income tax reductions. Fine as far as it goes. The problem is that when they look at those expansions and economists say we should be taxing more services, more consumption, but then when you read the bills, they never actually comport with the economists suggest, because the 3 largest categories of consumption, so things that consumers buy, is healthcare, education, and rent or housing. And no bill has ever been proposed to tax healthcare, education, or housing. And so when you take those off the table, you've got pet care, you've got haircuts, you've got lawn care, you've got auto repairs. There's a number of things that are mainly consumer oriented, but then they immediately go like, well, where's the real money left? Lawyers, accountants, engineers, management consultants, other professional services. Who buys those things? Businesses buy those things. So, it really is not, yes, certainly when you look at law services, you can distinguish between business and personal, but accounting services, and we did a study on this, 91% of all accounting services, and accounting is here defined broadly, not just CPA, because we have to rely on federal BEA data, 91% is purchased by businesses, governments, or nonprofits. which leaves 9%, which is mainly tax prep. So when a government says we're going to expand the sales tax base to accounting services, what they're saying is we're going to tax businesses directly on production because accounting services go into their production. And then we're going to tax people who buy tax preparation services. So we're going to tax people because we have other taxes that require them to buy a service to comply with. And to me, that's farcical, but we see it all the time. It's an active discussion right now in Nebraska, and we're working with your friend Joni, who heads the CPA Society there, to oppose that. And then I've got about 5 minutes left. We'll go on to the next one, which is digital taxation. You know, Maryland is not lit up here because you've already done a lot of this, so it's not happening right now. It's just, you know, states that have not done it. Obviously, the tax on digital advertising continues to be litigated in Maryland. I have multiple friends who are engaged in that litigation. In fact, the initial trial court judge who ruled against the state is a friend of mine as well. So I'm very familiar with that. And then with my remaining minutes, we'll do questions and then go to politics, Rebecca. So I'll take just a couple minutes on the final slide, looking at the elections that we have coming up here this fall. It's obviously a big election for the country. It's not actually a huge election at the state level because gubernatorial elections by design are mainly what we'll call out of cycle with the presidential election. So there are only 11 state governorships up this year. There are quite a number of state elections, as there are every year. I mean, in some states, every 2 years, every member of the House, for example, is up. I'm going to refer to my notes, but you can sort of see it on the slide. And it says it right here. You know, we're more divided than ever when it comes to state government control. I'm not going to talk about, you know, sociological issues, but you just look at the numbers, control of state governments. We have 40 states that are either controlled completely by Democrats, meaning both chambers of the legislature, plus the governorship, Democrats or Republicans. For those of you who are really, really smart on state politics, you'll say like, wait a minute, Nebraska can't have a trifecta because they only have a unicameral. So you can't have two chambers. There's only one. And they're nonpartisan. So how can you say they're Republican? Because I've been to Nebraska. It's controlled by Republicans, I assure you. So we've got 40 states that are trifectas, and and then you've got, you know, some divided government in a few states. But even in some of those states that are divided, the 10 states, you have a super majority in the legislature. So Kentucky is a good example. We have a Democratic governor, so technically it's divided government, but the Republicans have a super majority. So they can do anything they want to over the governor's veto as long as they hold together. So really we're down to 6 states with divided government, and they're very narrowly divided. So Arizona is a great example. We have a Democratic governor, but we have a 2-seat Republican majority in the House and a 2-seat Republican majority in the Arizona Senate. So I would not be surprised when we, you know, come out of the next elections, depending on what happens at the very top of the ticket, and I'm talking about the presidential election, to see that change. And looking at my notes here, 86 legislative chambers in 44 states will be up for election. Where we think you could see legislative control flipping are states including Minnesota. So you could actually see Republicans gain seats there, not completely flipping, but, you know, gain a chamber. Michigan went all Democratic in the last election for the first time in a generation. So you could see some regression there. Pennsylvania has been trending Democratic. We had strong Republican majorities for about a decade, dating from 2010. That has eroded, and now you've got split control there, very close. New Hampshire's an outlier. New Hampshire always flips around. Because it's the House in Representatives in New Hampshire is the 3rd largest democratically elected body in the world after the United States Congress and the Indian Parliament. So that's, you know, for like your next cocktail party, you can break that one out. And then Arizona, which I already mentioned. And I've left myself about 30 seconds, Rebecca. So I don't know if any more questions have come in, but I'm happy to answer those if they are. That last slide, which I know Rebecca will send out, if you're interested in more information on any of the things I talked about, you can visit our website, and our people write a lot about all these things, and you can actually read them and find out what's really going on as opposed to what I parroted from what they shared with me.
Thank you so much, Joe. I'm going to leave this slide up for a second because on an earlier slide, you saw Maryland in that dark blue, meaning there's some interest and some things that would make a tax on services attractive to folks in Annapolis. We've heard from our governor that maybe that's not the case this year, but I think an earlier slide also said active inaction is what we're seeing in state governments. And I'd say maybe that's true in Maryland right now as it comes to sales tax on services. So I'm going to leave this up because back in 2020, right before everything happened, we had a massive sales tax on services fight on our hands, and we need to be geared up for another one of those. And how we do that, of course, is through our PAC and establishing relationships. And so thank you so much, Joe, for being here, for giving that awesome overview of what's going on politically and policy-wise throughout the country. And to our members, thank you for being here as well. We will see you next month for our March town hall. Thank you all. And with that, we'll let you go.
Take care, everybody. Thank you.